Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kate Hujda. I work in the Upper Midwest Literary Archives, and I'm here today to talk about Bill Holm, known to some as Billy Holm, or Mr. Bill Holm Jr., Dr. William the Mad Holm, William the Checks in the Mail Holm, Spineless Bill Holm, you scumflake, or much more cordially, Professor Bill Holm in the White House in town. But known to all as Bill Holm, writer of published books. Bill was born in 1943 on a farm just north of the small town Minneota, Minnesota. He lived much of his life in Minneota, writing poetry and nonfiction, playing piano, and teaching a few towns over at Southwest State University, a place which Holm once referred to as a hotbed of lively literary activity and an unlikely geographical place. His books were largely influenced by his fondness for music, literature, the prairie, and other places he visited and loved. Fond of traveling, his nonfiction writings often recount his experiences abroad, including trips to China and to Iceland. He won several Minnesota Book Awards, and in 2008, a year before he passed away, he was named a McKnight Distinguished Artist, an award that recognizes artists who have chosen to make their lives and careers in Minnesota, thereby making our state a better place to live. To Garrison Keillor, Bill Holm was the sage of Minneota. To friend and fellow poet John Rosmersky, a missionary for the life of the mind. The polar bear of American literature, a big man with a huge presence, the last of the Vikings in Minnesota. He was over 6 feet tall, and that seemed to stick with people. A brilliant thinker, a magic presence, an American treasure. Bill Holm was many things to many people. Though I never had the chance to meet him, I too fell in love with Holm's poetry when I was a student studying creative writing. So when I started working here and I learned that we preserved Bill Holm's archives, I was pretty excited. Last spring, myself and a very dedicated team of students and volunteers started combing through all of the letters sent to Bill Holm. Letters from family, from friends, from colleagues, from publishers, from students, over 15 boxes of letters. Seemingly everyone and anyone. This presentation today is just a brief glimpse into the vast and varied world of Bill Holm as seen through letters to the poet himself. The correspondence we have preserved in the collection begins as early as 1959, and from these very earliest kept letters you can find correspondence from Robert Bly and Carol Bly, two incredibly well-known and talented writers in their own right. The first of these letters appears in 1964 when Bill Holm became the 900th subscriber to the 60s, the literary magazine managed by the Blys in the 60s. Their letter notified him that he had won a lifetime subscription to the magazine. In the letter, Carol Bly remarks that she was surprised and delighted to discover that Bill was the 900th subscriber because, quote, usually we don't know the 100th subscribers, but this time we were pleased we'd met you here. Holm was just 21 years old at the time. Letters from the Blys can be found throughout the entire collection of letters. There are several from Robert, but numerous letters from Carol, and really it's the letters from Carol Bly that I personally find the most fascinating. By reading her letters, Carol comes across as perhaps one of the strongest critics of Holm's work. Her letters almost always include professional critiques, some which I find sometimes a bit harsh even. But by reading her criticisms, you can see how her advice shaped Holm's work and how much value Holm must have placed on her advice. The letter pictured here is one of my favorites. It's dated 1978 and signed, jokingly, Amelia Earhart. This letter, like many of her letters, begins with a critique of one of Bill's poems. She writes, "Lovely. I'm not poet enough to know what's going on there anyway, but something is ecstatic." Objections to the poem are just the old ones of echoing Robert's work, as in Robert Bly. She goes on to describe the passage, which she thinks sounds too much like Robert Bly, this echo, she calls it, and then continues, "Anyway, Bill, in my opinion, you must remove it because it angers people to hear the echo, and then they won't finish and see your Bill Holm type offering further in the poem." And then this is This is great, I love this. So she goes on to say, I absolutely have no negative thing to say about the passage except to remove the echoes of Robert's work because, listen, dear Bill, you don't have to echo anybody. It'd be one thing if you were short of talent and so gained a little overtone or undertone by twanging Bly's string, but you aren't. What an amazing thing, like what an empowering thing for an aspiring writer to hear from anyone, let alone Carol Bly. I would have fainted if Carol Bly would have said that to me. Another really fascinating aspect of the letters is the documentation of Bill's long-standing relationship with Milkweed Editions, a relationship that goes back to the days when the press was better known as the Milkweed Chronicle, a journal aimed at local writers and artists. One can find amongst Bill's collected letters many wonderful and insightful letters from Milkweed's founding editor, Emily Buchwald. In a sense, Bill Holm's career trajectory and Milkweed's trajectory somewhat align. As Milkweed was becoming the publishing powerhouse it is today, it published seven of Holm's books, an over 20-year relationship. So the letters not only demonstrate the sort of personal relationships that develop when working with a writer over the course of several decades, but also document all the incredible details that need to come together in order to publish a book. The correspondence includes feedback from Milkweed editors, but also discussion over book design, publishing timeline, royalties, marketing strategies, and more. These letters here concern a piece of music, originally published in Bill Holm's first book of poetry, to be transcribed and included in Holm's Eccentric Islands, published in the year 2000. The letter explains that the third eighth note should be a D flat, but the last note of the measure should be a C natural. So when I say details, I mean details. Down to the note. These few letters here are just the tiniest sampling of the sort of literary luminaries that make cameo appearances in Bill Holm's collection of letters. Carol Bly and Robert Bly, Emily Buchwald, and Milkweed Editions, they're joined by Garrison Keillor, Mark Vins, Margaret Hassey, Phoebe Hansen, John Rosmersky, Freya Manfred, Fred Manfred, John Hassler, to name only a few. It's really quite remarkable that someone 50 years from now could similarly comb through these letters and really get a sense of what the literary scene was like here in Minnesota. But the letters also provide proof of the existence of fans far outside the confines of our state. As it turns out, Kurt Vonnegut was a strong admirer as well. In 1993, he wrote to one of Bill's colleagues, "I can't thank you enough for this Bill Holm essay. Who is he? Does anybody else know how important he is?" And then, several months later, this time writing to Bill himself, "It's obvious from your blurbs that I am among the last people to discover what an important writer you are, so wise and agreeable." By reading his letters, one begins to understand just how loved and admired Bill Holm was. By his colleagues, students, we have hundreds of letters from former students and friends. Bill Holm made friends wherever he went. Anyone from the Icelandic ambassador at the U.S. Embassy in Reykjavik, or the front office manager at the Holiday Inn in China. But seriously, all joking aside, I think this is really cool because you can see the value that Holm placed on these friendships. Archives, any archive, they only include what was kept. And Bill Holm kept all of these letters, sometimes even for decades, because they mattered to him. They were valuable, just as valuable as his manuscripts or his journals. The collection of letters also includes just a lot of stuff sent to Bill. Holm was keenly interested in politics, and there's clear evidence of that in the letters, including a fair amount of political humor. Bill frequently wrote his representatives, and there's evidence of that in the correspondence as well. This letter here is in protest to the Vietnam War. And also this letter to Governor Rudy Perpich. Apparently, Holm had sent the governor a copy of his book, The Music of Failure. Governor Perpich had several very kind things to say about it. Even Bill Clinton makes an appearance here. Holm was not one to shy away from making his concerns heard to his representatives, even at our highest level of government. And in 2008, he infiltrated the Republican National Convention, managing to obtain a media floor pass, which we have in the archives. Along with a passion for politics, Bill Holm was also fond of pigs. His correspondents sent him pig photos, pig drawings, pig stickers, pig cards. He was formally inducted into the Order of the Pig, though I'm not quite sure what that means. Perhaps his induction came with this official club pig pen? People sent Bill Holm pig-related things all the time. This letter here says, "Dear Bill, how can you ever be out of our mind with all of these constant reminders?" And then clipped to it, this news clipping of a pig in sunglasses. In fact, just yesterday, we found evidence that several years before Bill published his first book of poetry, he was soliciting his writer friends for poems about pigs, hoping to publish an anthology of pig poems. He had collected pig poems from Carol Bly and Phoebe Hansen, among several others. Bill was also a fan of odd recipes. Recipes from the crude to the downright bizarre. So this card contains recipes from the 1989 Chill-Off. There's a recipe for orange Jell-O and lutefisk, as well as green Jell-O dusted with dillweed and mayonnaise. And not just any mayonnaise, real mayonnaise, Kraft mayonnaise, no substitutions. Making all of these wonderful letters and artifacts, ephemera, available to our wider audience is our top priority at the moment. In fact, the Upper Midwest Literary Archives recently secured a grant to bring Bill Holm's archives to the public, as well as to increase access around 3 other related collections, including the archives of Margaret Hassey, Robert Bly, and of course, Milkweed Editions. We're calling the project Prairie Poets and Press, Literary Lives of the Upper Midwest. The project is financed in part with funds from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, which receives its funding from the Legacy Amendment. Are all of you familiar with the Legacy Amendment? All right, so those of you who have seen me speak before, you know it's coming because there's nothing I love more than talking about the Legacy Amendment. In 2008, Minnesotans voted to increase the sales tax by 0.3%. This small increase generates literally billions of dollars each year, which is then divided up to support clean water, parks and trails, nature restoration projects, environmental and national resources, and arts and cultural heritage projects such as this one. So this extra funding will help us turn boxes like these into boxes like these. And I should note that these boxes here, this is after a first pass of sorting the materials in the collection. Bill's archive, when it first came to us, was not organized into the neat and tidy categories we archivists much prefer. The word that's been tossed around is idiosyncratic. The arrangement of the collection before arriving here was idiosyncratic in nature and marked by Bill Holm's own particularities. So our work now is to folder, arrange, and create inventories with notes that illuminate all of the amazing resources hidden within these collections. We'll also be doing some outreach around these collections, so keep an eye out for special events coming up, as well as a copyright assessment, which would serve as a roadmap should we ever attempt to digitize any of these collections in whole. All total, we'll be addressing approximately 350 boxes of archival material from 4 critical and very much interrelated collections. Through the archives of Holm, Hassey, Bly, and Milkweed, we'll uncover the ways in which these particular collections document the intimate and often interconnected relationships among writers, the relationship between writers in a particular place in a particular time, and the role editors and publishers play in anchoring and supporting a literary community. We'll question the particularities of the prairie and its effect on nurturing great poets and artists, and we'll be able to share this wealth with anyone who is interested, both in Minnesota and beyond, especially those who are keenly interested in the work of one Professor Author Bill Holm, Dr. William Holm, Big Bill William Holm, or simply Bill Holm of Minneota, Minnesota, USA. Before I close, I do need to do some thank yous first to curator Cecily Marcus, project archivist Carissa Hansen, volunteer Paula Von Drasek, and students Carly and Kai. Without their help, none of this important work would be getting done. And lastly, I want to let you know that April is National Poetry Month, and we are celebrating. So our staff will be doing all sorts of cool things on social media throughout the month of April. We may even be resurrecting some of those forgotten pig poems I mentioned earlier. So if that strikes your curiosity, follow the libraries on Twitter and Instagram, and stay tuned. We've got even more surprises yet to share. Thank you.